The unexpected Battle of Naboo did not begin with a military assault or invasion, nor did it begin with open conflict on the temperate plains of the planet, but rather it began in the chambers of the Galactic Senate on Coruscant. Free trade zones in the Mid-Rim, a sector of space that corporations relied on to maximize profits, were now subject to Republic taxes due to the passing of the bill Proposition 31814D, a resolution made by the Galactic Senate toward the end of Chancellor Valorum's term and supported by Senator Palpatine of Naboo. Newt Gunray, the Viceroy of the Trade Federation, was outraged by this proposition, and through planning with his backer, Darth Sidious, retaliated to these new taxes on their trade routes via a full blockade of the unassuming planet of Naboo, hoping it would send a message and allow him to demand concessions from the Senate of the Galactic Republic. In response, Chancellor Valorum sent 2 Jedi to the blockade to act as ambassadors, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-gon Jinn. Naboo's recent political decisions left it particularly susceptible to such a tactic. The previous queen preceding Padme Amidala, Queen Sanandrasa, had favored isolationist policies that left Naboo with few allies in their sector of space, and a labor shortage meant that Naboo had to source much of its food from off-world. The Trade Federation's blockade meant that Naboo could not receive the supplies it needed to feed its people, but Queen Amidala refused to yield to the Trade Federation. In response, and on orders from Darth Sidious, Newt Gunray ordered a military invasion of the planet. While it was not uncommon for galactic corporations to maintain their own security forces, the Trade Federation required a substantial military to complete a planet-wide full-scale invasion. In the weeks leading up to the blockade, the Federation had drastically increased their droid army by ordering additional units from the factories on Geonosis. The Trade Federation's army was complemented by the use of powerful and efficient instruments of war, including the heavily armed Bactoid armored assault tank, and the fast, maneuverable single-troop armed platform which provided advanced scouting. While the blockade of Naboo was considered technically legal, the invasion was absolutely not. The Trade Federation quickly established air superiority, and met only minimal resistance from Naboo's pilots, as they were both shocked by the size of the invasion force and also on orders from the Queen to remain as peaceful as possible, as she still felt negotiations were possible. Their ground forces, deployed via massive C-9979 landing ships, captured the capital of Naboo, the city called Theed. The Trade Federation counted on a swift capture of Queen Amidala to force her to sign a treaty that would legalize the Federation's occupation and effectively condemn her people to a life of servitude. They were confident that Naboo's suffering would persuade her to ratify the treaty, no matter its conditions. As the Queen, Amidala was the only person capable of approving such a treaty or providing a legal signature. While her escape off-planet with the Jedi ambassadors during the initial stages of the invasion hindered the Federation's plans, it extended her people's suffering. While the Queen made her way to Coruscant to request the Senate's assistance, the people in Theed were placed in prison camps. Despite the perceived futility of rebellion against the occupying force, a small faction of security forces and some of the Queen's handmaidens began organizing resistance in the event of Amidala's return. Unfortunately for Naboo, Queen Amidala was unsuccessful in pleading her planet's case to the Senate. Therefore, the defense of the planet and the repelling of the Trade Federation fell to her and the people of Naboo. This included the Gungans, who had a difficult history with the humans that shared their homeworld. While the all-volunteer security forces of Naboo were unflinchingly loyal to the planet and its royalty, they lacked the numbers to fight back against an army like the Trade Federation's. Queen Amidala realized that the Gungan army would be their salvation, and upon return to Naboo, she pleaded with Gungan leadership to help. The Gungans had only just recently escaped a string of attacks from the droid army themselves, and, pleased with Queen Amidala's willingness to beg for help, Boss Rugor Nass, the leader of the Gungans, pledged his support to the Queen's cause. While Queen Amidala and her forces, including Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-gon Jinn, focused on retaking the capital city Theed, as well as launching an attack on the droid control ship in orbit above the planet, the Gungan Grand Army faced off against the Trade Federation's ground forces in a diversionary tactic in a region known as the Great Plains. The Gungans readied themselves out in the open as the bulk of the droid forces converged on their location, barraging the Gungans with artillery. However, the Gungans utilized translucent mobile energy shields strapped to the back of creatures known as Fambas, swamp-dwelling herbivores capable of growing up to 9 meters in height. Gungan leadership rallied their forces and boosted morale while mounted on two-legged animals called Kadu, commonly trained by the Gungans to act as their battle mounts. Gungan foot soldiers and artillery utilized small explosives called boomas, made up of harvested plasma that was formed into a projectile. Coming in various sizes, boomas were the primary armament of the Gungan Grand Army. The soldiers themselves were called militia gung, and service in the Grand Army was considered an honor amongst the species, and many adults spent time in the army at some point in their life. However, the function of the army was primarily to control dangerous wildlife. The energy shields utilized on the backs of the Fambas were originally used in defense against the sea monsters found in Naboo's oceans. The Trade Federation droid army, unable to pierce the energy shield generated by the Gungans, approached on foot, passing through the bubble individually. The B-1 battle droids, the cheap basic unit of the droid army, manufactured by and modeled after the Geonosians, responded to a central computer on a droid control ship in space that gave them their marching orders. This was a design that was later fixed in updated models of the B-1, which gave them their individual personalities. For now, however, they were uniform in their behavior. Accompanying the B-1s were droidicas, also known as destroyer droids. These rolling monstrosities, designed in a round fashion to allow for quick traversal around the battlefield, essentially entered a siege mode when engaging in conflict. Droidicas were equipped with double blaster cannons at the end of each arm and a deflector shield generator that activated when standing. The Trade Federation, reluctant to pay the high prices for these droids, used them sparingly. They transported their droids to the war zone via the MTT, the multi-troop transport, capable of ferrying up to 112 folded battle droids on its internal racks. Leading the Gungan army in this battle was Tobler Keel, a general and a close friend and former comrade-in-arms of Boss Nass. Tobler Keel, an experienced fighter, was accompanied by Jar Jar Binks, who had been promoted to general as well at the last minute by Boss Nass himself. General Binks stood in contrast to the veteran General Keel, and therefore was protected by Captain Roose Tarples on the battlefield. Standing opposed to the Gungan leadership was the B-1 battle droid OOM-9, denoted as the commander by his yellow markings and enhanced cognitive and tactical module. OOM-9 had been behind the attacks on the Gungan cities, including Otogunga. The two armies stood opposed to each other, the Gungans in the open fields of the Great Plains and the droid army across on Shock Ridge. Meanwhile, the Royal Security Forces, led by Queen Amidala and her bodyguard, Captain Korsh Panaka, infiltrated Theed via a network of underground tunnels beneath the city and freed those in the prison camps, including the rest of Amidala's handmaidens, and Korsh Panaka's wife, another captain in the security forces. Next, they rescued the pilots in the Royal Palace's starship hangar, where the seasoned pilot Rick Ollier led Bravo Squadron in a formation of N-1 starfighters against the lone droid control ship in space above Naboo. At this stage, the Trade Federation disbanded their blockade, hoping to soften the appearance of the occupation in the event that the Republic arrived. They had left only the single droid control ship to oversee the battle for the planet. Bravo Squadron, led by Rick Ollier, led the N-1 starfighters against the Trade Federation's Lucrehulk-class spaceship, called the Vutun Pala, in an attempt to destroy it and thus shut down the droid army below, and relieve the Gungans of their diversionary attack. However, the Naboo pilots had much difficulty achieving this. The sleek design of the N-1 starfighter was a reflection of Naboo culture. Their love of the arts, architecture, and design was obvious in the appearance of their primary starfighter, as the ship balanced both function and elegance. However, there simply wasn't enough of them to stand a chance against the droid control ship. It wasn't until Anakin Skywalker, having commandeered an N-1 back down in the hangar to assist the ground forces, was taken to the space battle via autopilot that the fight began to turn in the Naboo's favor. Meanwhile, back down on the planet, after rescuing the pilots, Padme led her infiltration team out of the hangar, but were stopped by Darth Maul. It was here that the two Jedi Knights, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-gon Jinn, broke off from the infiltration team to duel the Sith. They engaged in a lightsaber fight, where Darth Maul lured them into the buildings holding the city's power generators. The gigantic machinery housed in this vast interior mined naturally occurring plasma from below, deep within the planet. As they dueled along the service catwalks surrounding the plasma extraction tubes, Darth Maul continued to lure them further into the power generator complex, his primary strategy to split the Jedi up so he could defeat them one at a time. His plan worked, as Maul utilized the laser doors at the back of the facility to orchestrate this. These laser doors were on a timer, meant to lock into position in response to potentially lethal power outputs that occur during the plasma activation process, which emanated from the core towards the back of the facility behind the laser doors. Darth Maul would use the advantage to defeat Qui-gon Jinn, but would then be outmatched by a vengeful Obi-Wan Kenobi. While this duel transpired, Queen Amidala and her entourage battled their way through the Theed royal palace in order to reach the throne room, where Nute Gunray had been based. With most of the droid forces preoccupied with the Gungan army, only pockets of droid guards remained throughout the city. Meanwhile, the Gungan army was on the back foot. The droid army had given up bombardment of the energy shields and forced their way on foot into the Gungan defenses. OOM-9 ordered the battle droids be unloaded by the MTTs carrying the droid army on the field with the Gungans, and once said droids cleared the membrane of the shield, engaged in close quarters fighting. The Gungan army's plans for stalling dissipated, and the fighting became chaotic. The Gungan artillery, no longer obstructed by the shield, was free to fire back at the droids. General Binks and Keel signaled for a retreat when no word from Amidala came through, but soon found themselves surrounded at blaster point by the droid army. It was at this moment that the battle turned. Anakin Skywalker had disabled his autopilot and rocketed through the droid control ship's hangars and hallways, and destroyed the ship from within, firing a volley of proton torpedoes at the battleship's reactor. All Trade Federation on board were killed in the blast, and Bravo Squadron flew back down to the planet victorious. The sudden destruction of the droid control ship rendered all droids down on the surface inactive, including their commander, OOM-9. The Gungans stood victorious over the inoperable droid army of the Trade Federation. At the same time, Queen Amidala and Captain Korsh Panaka had captured the Viceroy Nute Gunray after a skirmish in the royal palace, ending the primary conflict of the Battle for Naboo. When all was tallied, the Gungans had suffered the highest casualties between them, Bravo Squadron, and the Royal Security Forces retaking Theed. A new treaty was signed, ending the Trade Federation's occupation of the planet and barring the organization from further bothering Naboo. The defeated droid army left on the fields of the planet were turned over by the Trade Federation as a condition of the treaty, and were melted down and repurposed for the construction and beautification of Naboo's architecture. After-action summaries of the battle showed reports of interesting observations of General Jar Jar Binks during the fighting. Many Gungan soldiers marked his improbable survivability during the battle, and attributed this to divine selection from the Gungan gods. While this inspired the militia Gung to continue fighting fiercely, in actuality, General Binks' survival can be connected to Captain Roose Tarpals, a career military veteran in the Gungan Grand Army. Captain Tarpals was instrumental in the evacuation of Oto Gunga when the droid army first attacked, and many in the army expected Boss Nass to promote him to general to serve alongside General Keel. However, that honor was bestowed to Jar Jar Binks. Captain Tarpals requested to serve under Jar Jar to help advise the new and untrained general during the battle. And in fact, Tarpals is credited with 16 battle droid kills, many of which Tarpals had cut down while protecting General Binks. It is Tarpals who is responsible for the perceived divine invincibility of Jar Jar, as well as the reason Jar Jar's unit in the Grand Army functioned as well as it did. To honor the great loss experienced by the Gungans, Queen Amidala and Boss Nass forged a pact of peace between their two civilizations, and vowed to usher in a new era of cooperation on Naboo. To mark the occasion, a parade was held in Theed. Trade returned to the planet, as the resources now shared between the Naboo and the Gungans allowed their populations to flourish together. Many Gungans even relocated to human settlements on the surface to sell their goods and promote further trade and cooperation. Sadly, within a year after the battle, cross-culture activity quietly lessened between the Gungans and the humans. In the meantime, Senator Palpatine of Naboo seized on the sympathies generated by the whole event and won election to replace Finis Valorum as the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The Trade Federation would, however, continue to operate in the galaxy, despite Nute Gunray's many trials in the Senate. It was this ineffectiveness on the part of the Galactic Republic that created dissatisfaction with the government and fueled the Separatist crisis. Without the Battle of Naboo, Palpatine would not have climbed the ranks to become the Chancellor. Although the Battle of Naboo predated the Clone Wars by a full 10 years, because of its impact, it is considered the first spark of the Clone Wars.